Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this Academics at U of T session of New Journeys, International Welcome, our orientation for IFP international students and international students at New College in general. Today we have the wonderful Dr. Alexandra Guerson here facilitating this session. To introduce Alexandra, she is the coordinator of the New One program. So if any of you are taking New One courses this year or will potentially take them next year, she is the coordinator for the entire program. She is also the IFP 100 instructor, so the history course instructor, which is the credit course. And then finally, and last but certainly not least, she's also teaching another history course this year for all undergraduate students, and it's called Histories of Violence. So without further ado,
cheerful topic.
Yeah, very cheerful. Without further ado,
Hopefully today is going to be a little, more cheerful than that. Let me just share with you my presentation. Give me a second here. Okay. So it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Tyler, for this introduction. I've been at U of T now for PhD. So if I include my PhD, I've been at U of T for 17 years now and teaching for the last 10 years in the International Foundation Program, in the History Department, and at New One, as Tyler suggested. And in my own academic career, I've been through a few different transitions. So I think that's one of the reasons why often I get asked to talk to you a little bit about transitioning to U of T. So I just want to say welcome to all of you, and let's get started. So what is it that we are going to talk about today? Just before we get started, I'm sure all of you are pros on Zoom by now, but I like to remind people that they can make a more pleasant viewing experience by viewing the slides and the speaker side by side, and you can do that by clicking on the view options on the top of this sharing screen and selecting side-by-side mode. And then you can drag the line in between my face and the slides to resize that. So I just like to give this tip if people want to have, be able to be seeing the slides and seeing me at the same time, if they choose to do that. Okay, for now, what I want you to do is go to the chat window at the bottom there and tell us where you're from. Where are you right now? Country. So just so for me to get a sense of who am I speaking to today. Let's see. Oh, Mongolia, Japan, China, Kazakhstan. Oh, it's going very fast. Brazil, India, USA, Taiwan, Malaysia, India. There's surely representation here. Hong Kong, yes, hello. Taiwan, another one from Taiwan, so you can see you're not alone. Singapore, a lot of people in the evening. Not everyone is in daytime here. Good for you for joining us. Some in Canada. Anyone in Toronto? Just curious. Is anyone actually here right now? Yes, I see one person from Toronto. Replied to me. Okay, excellent. Very good. This gives us a sense of where you are. Well, welcome to U of T. Even if you're still at home, you're now part of U of T. And I want to get a sense from you now. Tyler is going to start a poll, or actually I could start. Should I?
I can start it.
Okay. I want to have a sense from you how you feel about this year. So Tyler's going to share a poll with you. Yeah, you can click on your answer here. Which word best describe how you feel? Are you nervous? Are you excited? Do you feel prepared? Do you feel overwhelmed? There's too many things to think about. Or do you feel all of those things? The numbers are changing. Okay, almost everyone has voted. 7 people still thinking about it. I'm not sure how I feel. Maybe that should be an option. So I can see most of you obviously feel a little bit of all of these things, right? It's natural. Not only you are making that big transition to go to university, but it's also going to university in a different country. I wasn't here in the previous meeting where you talked about whether you had been to Canada before, but I've certainly had a lot of students who, when they came to study here at U of T, it was their first time, in some cases their first time out of their country, but certainly their first time in Canada. So great admiration for you, for your courage, for your spirit of adventure to come across the world to experience this education. So we're all going to feel all kinds of different feelings right now, and that's very normal. So if you want to see the results here, there are results of our poll. Now, let's talk a little bit about this transition from high school to university at first. Now, I would argue that moving on from high school to university, oh, why does poll keep showing? There you go, is a type of cultural shock. Okay. We often talk about cultural shock in terms of moving from one country to another. And you can expect that in a way because you're moving to a different language, you're moving to a place where people have different customs. So when people travel, they expect there will be some degree of strangeness, right? But going from high school to university, even if you're still at home and even if you're going to be following your classes online, it's still going to require a certain moving from one culture to another culture, because you're moving from your school culture, whatever that was, into the academic culture at the University of Toronto, which will be different. You're also moving from expectations around what is expected of you in high school from what is expected for you at university. So hold on a second. So go to the chat window again and think about what is the thing you're most nervous about. A lot of you said you were nervous, but also a lot of you felt all of the above in that question, right? So what is one thing about coming to study at U of T, even if virtually, that you feel is something that's making you a little nervous? Share that with us. Okay, I see language and academic. Okay, so maybe how you do in classes. The academic rigor is another, okay. Might fail all the courses. Oh, hopefully not. The workload, the study load, language, yes. So we see there's some common issues there. Does anybody feel anything different? Making friends, getting involved, very, very important. Because in many cases, some of us have been at a school for a long time and have all our friends, right? And you're coming to a different school and starting from scratch again with having to make that circle of friends again. Weather. That's always an issue when people come to Canada. Freshman 15, yes. I came to Canada from Brazil. Weather could be a factor. Yeah, it was a factor too. Food, yes. So we can see a range of different issues there of what makes people nervous. I'm going to be talking about some of those here today. And at the end, maybe we have some time to talk a little bit about some of those other ones that I haven't touched on. Making friends this year is going to require a little bit more work on everyone's part, right? From the professors to the students. I'm certainly, as someone who's going to be teaching in a classroom, not in the classroom, but virtually, right, online, I certainly feel that I will have to make some opportunities in my courses for students to meet one another, because I know they won't have the experience of being in a class where they get to sit beside someone, you know, have a conversation before class, or meet someone in the hallway while they're waiting for class to start. Those kinds of informal conversations are not going to be happening in the same way this year. So I know that many of my colleagues and I have been thinking about how can we help students to make those connections. But other folks at the university are also thinking about that. I know in the IFB office, in the student life office, there's a lot of people thinking about how to make sure that you have opportunities to meet other people. So take advantage of those whenever you can. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the academics here, which is what a lot of you are nervous about. I would say that one of the biggest issues when it comes to any sense of shock, right, of cultural shock in this transition, has to do with expectations. And I would say has to do with a difference in expectation between what you expect, right? So what is it that you expect from your classes, from your professors, from what you need to do? And what is it that your professors expect of you in those courses? So sometimes those expectations align, but in many cases, those expectations can also come into not a direct conflict, but they can be misaligned, right? So they're not quite aligned. And this is where we sometimes stumble. And often for no fault of anyone's part, it's just that there is a little bit of a miscommunication there, right? So to talk a little bit more about that, I wanted to share with you two transition stories. I'm going to share with you a little bit about my story and the story of my best friend you see in this picture here, Dana. She is also a professor. We met in graduate school. She authorized me to talk about her story here. She does that. She tells her story to her students as well. And I want to talk about our stories because they are different. They show two different experiences of that first year. And it tells us a little bit about what is happening, what can happen in that experience. Sorry about that. Okay, so what happened? Well, like you, I came to Canada as an international student. Unlike you, well, I would say one difference is I wasn't transitioning from high school to university. I already had a university degree when I came to Canada, but it was in a different field. I wanted to change fields, so I started again from scratch. I started an undergraduate program in history. But like you, or maybe like some of you, I was also worried about language. I was also worried about the workload, the academic side of things. I was worried if my English was going to be good enough. I mean, I felt I was okay talking to people, I could read, but I had never been in a class studying something, you know, at a university level in English. But it turns out that the language wasn't really the main issue. For me, at that point, when I first started my undergraduate here in Canada, learning was going to class, right? Copying, taking notes, what the professor said, studying that material, repeating it on an exam, because that was the kind of learning that I had experienced in school. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, that was a very small part of what I had to do at university. Here in Canada, my professors expected me to do more than that. They expected me to engage with what they were telling me. They expected me to ask questions about it. They expected me to be critical of everything I read, everything I learned. They were constantly asking me, what did I think about this? What did I think about that? And that was very confusing to me because I was just a student. It's like, what do I know? I mean, I don't know. I'm reading this for the first time. How can I have anything to think about that? How can I criticize people who had been studying this for decades, right? I found that very difficult because I wasn't really trained for that kind of activity, right? That kind of questioning before. Now, my professors were interested in what I had to say, but it wasn't just that they wanted me to have an opinion about the things that I was reading. They wanted me to look at all the different materials that I had, you know, and use it as evidence to support what I wanted to say, right? And I found out, sometimes the hard way, that not all evidence is the same. Some evidence is not appropriate. So that took some time. But in that first year, I came in knowing that I was coming into a foreign experience, right? I came in thinking that I was at a disadvantage compared to my friends who had come from Canadian schools. So I had the expectation that things were going to be different. And because I knew they were going to be different, or I expected them to be different, then I needed to find out how were they going to be different, right? So because of that, every time I had an assignment, I went to my professor's office to ask or to check if I understood it correctly, if I was on the right track. Because I wasn't sure on my language, I would write a bit, I would bring it to my TA, the teaching assistant, or to my professor, you know, is this more or less what you expect? And through doing things like that, I've learned when I made mistakes before I actually did the assignment. Turns out that where I was, like in Brazil, we write essays in a very particular way. And we're more used to breaking up our essays into subparts with subtitles. And here, especially in history, when you're writing in English and you're writing something short, you don't do that. You don't do subtitles. Your text is supposed to flow naturally from one point to another. So all these things were things that I found out by going to those office hours and talking to professors. So in the end, I ended up doing well in that first year, much to my surprise. But from knocking in a lot of doors and asking a lot of questions. Now, what happened to my friend? Now, my friend had a very different experience. On the one hand, she came into university feeling a lot more confident than I did. Unlike me, or any of you, she was born and raised here in Toronto. Her parents had studied at U of T, so she knew about the university. She could talk to her parents about their experience. And she had been, in high school, she had been a very good student, particularly in history and English, which were the topics she wanted to study at university. You know, we all want to study the things we know we're good at, right? So those are the things she was good at. She was good at writing. She was good in reading. So, okay, she signed up for English courses and history courses. In her English class, first English class at U of T, she was asked to write an essay. She was like, yay, I can write essays. I did well in those in high school. Yeah, no problem. So she was very confident. She wrote her essay, handed it in, feeling very good about it. Then she got her essay back. What mark do you think she got? Someone suggest something in the chat there? A, B, C, D, F, D, C minus. Okay, B, okay, C plus. Okay, now I would say a lot of a lot of courses in first year average can easily be in the C range. Okay, and we're going to talk about why in a minute. But my friend actually got her essay back with an F. It was the first time she has ever seen an F in her life. She was shocked. She like, what happened? It's like, what did I do? It turns out she didn't cite any sources in her essay. She didn't know she had to. She never had to in high school. Now, what does it mean to cite sources? Well, it means you're acknowledging where you got the information for your essay. It means giving credit to those who thought about ideas before you did. And she didn't do it because she never had an experience doing that. She just had an assignment that says, write an essay about topic X. So that's what she did. Today, she would have been maybe reported to the Office of Student Academic Integrity, because that would have been considered, not citing your sources is considered an academic integrity violation. So very stressful thing for her. It shook her, as you can imagine. And then in her history class, okay, so I see a question there about citation format. I'll get to that in a minute. In my case with citations, because I had some experience at university before, in Brazil, there is one citation system that everyone has to use. So I knew about the existence of citation systems and formats, but I didn't know what it was here. So I had to ask that question when I had to write my first assignment. And the short answer is, there isn't one, there are many. So you really have to ask your professors in your classes, because it may be Chicago in ones, it may be APA in others, it may be something else entirely. So, and some of them, they'll give you a choice. Her other favorite topic was medieval history. Her first medieval history course, she ended with a C+. Again, not going well for her in that first few courses. Now, the question here is why, right? So what is the difference there between these two experiences? What do you think accounts for these two? You know, in the end of my first year, I ended up having good marks. You know, I had A's, I was doing well. And she was kind of scrambling a little bit and having these bad experiences. So Mango says here, seeking profs. Yes, that definitely helps. Seeking people when needed. Now, this is the important point, right? You may think that you need to ask for help when you need it. The question is, how do you know when you need it? This was really what the difference was here. She didn't think she needed help. She felt confident, right? What happened was that there was a difference in expectations. She didn't know what she didn't know. Now, in my case, I assumed I didn't know. And I assumed I was going to have problems. Just because I was an international student who didn't have English as my main language, right? So this is where a little bit of difference can, sometimes local students can have more problems than international students precisely because of that. So seeking help is very important. Even if you don't feel you need it, drop by those office hours. You know, a lot of students don't go to office hours because they think the professor is busy, the professor is doing things that are more important. But office hours, you're going to see in all your courses, your professor is going to put in the syllabus, when do they have office hours? And office hours, what they mean is not the time that your professor is just in their office. Office hours mean the time the professor set aside for you to drop by. They're going to be waiting for anyone to drop by to talk about the course. If that time is not convenient to you, we also expect that students are going to message us to make an appointment at some other time. Okay, so this is time that's set aside for you. We want to help. So ask questions to your professors, ask questions to your TAs. Don't be shy. It won't look bad. Now, during the online semester, office hours will be different, I think, in different courses. We are still sorting out what will be best. It's going to depend on which class it is. I expect I have a lot of international students. Many of my students are going to be in China. So I'm going to have to try to find times that is convenient for both of us, right? And it may be that I'll have a Zoom meeting like this and people will come and I can talk to them either one-on-one or in a group. I think there will be different solutions for different classes. Asking help also can mean not just your professors and TAs, but also other resources at the university. You know, so for example, one of the things I did, because I didn't feel very confident about my writing, I attended workshops in a writing center. You know, I had to write a book report. I didn't know what that would look like. So I made an appointment with a writing center so someone could help me figure out how to write a good report, book report. And in fact, the diagram that writing center instruction gave me in that very first appointment on how to do a book report is something I used in my whole undergraduate career. All the different colleges have learning specialists. These are people who are there to help you organize, you know, your year, your courses. What are the issues you're having? You know, if your issue is like how to study, how to take notes, how to manage your time, anything related to your academic life, they can work with you on one-on-one to solve that issue. So learning specialists are great. You hear more information about them. You can ask your registrar's office about them. So this is certainly something that's available to you. But also understanding expectations, right? And you understand the expectations a little bit better if you talk to your professors, your TAs, other students in the class. But keep that conversation going with your professors and TAs. That will be important for you. Making friends. Some of you mentioned that you're nervous about making friends. That is going to be important, not just this year, but coming up throughout your 4 or 5 years at university. Having a strong circle of friends helps you, right? Having that support network. I mean, right now you're at home, but eventually you're gonna come to Canada. You're gonna have to deal with homesickness. So having a strong support network would help. That's the other thing that really helped me in that first year, was that I was going to university where The classes were smaller, so it was a little easier for me to make friends. And I quickly had a strong group of friends that I could study with, that I could go to class with. That really helped figure out that first year. At U of T can be a little bit more isolating because there's so many classes, there's so many students that it can be a little bit harder to make friends, but you will get there, I promise you. So find your team. Now, we talked a bit about the difference there where my friend got a C, you know, or an F. And that was very surprising. I mentioned too that, you know, some of the average in some courses are C's or C minuses or C pluses, and that can be very shocking. I know all of you probably did very well in school. I know most of my students come in with A averages in the 80s, 90s. So they're used to seeing a good performance, right, in school. And then they come here and they end up with something in the 60s, and then they was like, what happened? Like, is this more difficult? And my answer is that it's not really more difficult. Again, it's a difference in terms of expectation. If we look at this chart here, this is what the Faculty of Arts and Science say what the grades mean, okay? And if we look at what the grades mean and read the words here beside it, we're going to realize a few things that jump out. One is at the higher level here, at the A range, one thing that jumps at me when I'm reading this description is the emphasis here, strong evidence of original thinking. Superior grasp of subject matter with sound critical evaluations. The word critical here is very important. When you get to the B level, the word critical is there too. There's some evidence of critical capacity. We get to C. What is a C? A C is a student who is benefiting from their university experience and a student who shows understanding of the material. So technically speaking, if you do your assignment correctly, you can get a C. It doesn't mean it is wrong, you did anything wrong. The difference between a C and a B and an A has to do with levels of critical thinking. It's not whether you fulfill the requirements. I wrote 5 pages using these sources this way. It's not about the technical aspects of the assignment. It's the thinking that went behind it, particularly the critical capacity. There's a strong emphasis on that in all of your education. And so why is that? What is critical thinking, right? I will comment on some of the questions that are coming up in a minute. What is critical thinking? When I say critical thinking, you know, what action do you think you need to perform to apply critical thinking? What does it involve? What do you think? Questioning. Exactly, Mateus. Question the info you receive, to ask questions. It's all about asking questions. So analyzing is asking questions. Okay, so when you read something, so someone makes a statement about something, you know, you ask, okay, this is a statement, okay, but why? If I'm saying, I don't know, COVID-19 affects older people more, okay, but why? You know, why is it, why is that? You say, oh, because older people have a weaker immune system. Okay, how do we know that? Right? What evidence is being used to support that argument? What is it that we don't know? So you're not just taking that information, okay, COVID-19 affects older people more. Okay, I just accept that, move on. I don't really dig a little deeper into understanding where is that coming from. Have there been enough studies done? You know, maybe that basic statement is based on a very small sample in one small place. So in fact, is something that we can't really say for sure, right? So asking questions about the things that you're being exposed to will help you be a little bit more critical. And being critical doesn't mean that you reject something. It doesn't mean that you point out that negative things about it. Okay, being critical just means that you understand the context that information comes from, that you understand that there's some limits, that you understand there's a little bit more work that needs to be done. So you're able to participate in that conversation about that topic. Because at the end of the day, what we do at university is scholarship, okay? And you may think about the term scholarship as in money you receive for studying, but the other meaning of scholarship is how we is what scholars do, is how we make claims about the world following a particular set of principles so that those claims can be seen as valid. Okay, so each discipline, each field of study, we have a particular way, a particular set of principles that you need to use to be able to make the claims you make. And as a student, you're also a scholar participating in that conversation. Okay, so when you think about research, when you think about academic articles, think of it as a conversation about a topic. These people have been talking about it. You are joining in that conversation. And maybe when you just walk into the conversation, you don't really know what has been said before, you know, where is the conversation going right now? You just jumped in. So your job will be then to kind of, okay, maybe ask around, okay, so what was talked about before? Oh, you know, we already covered this and this and this. Okay, so what is it that's being said now? What are the possible conversations are going to happen in the future? So that's why critical thinking is important. And it's also why academic integrity is important, right? And you're going to see a lot of emphasis on that at university. And that's why, you know, my friend had that terrible experience in the first essay where she got an F for not citing her sources. And this is where the expectations issue comes in. Because it's so important that we recognize where ideas come from, that it becomes then a matter of making ethical choices about acknowledging that information. Sometimes students, or sometimes we feel that if we cite too many other people or to cite too much in an essay, the essay is not our own. But that is not true. Citing all the evidence that you found shows that A, you've done research, shows that the claims you're making have support from others who have been studying it for longer. So in fact, it makes it stronger. So there's a lot of emphasis on that issue of academic integrity in a lot of classes. And for us who are coming in, maybe with English as a second language, that can be a little tricky because we're being asked to read things and then have to reshape that reading into our own words, and that can be a little bit tricky, right? So I have a couple examples here to show you about that, and then I'll answer some of the questions that have been popping up. So Kanish, I didn't forget about your question earlier. So here's an example of that. So to make sure that you're following, doing things in terms of academic integrity in writing, it means you're following certain conventions about citing sources. This is what my friend did not do, right? So let's see an example of that. So you're going to hear the word paraphrasing a lot, right? So let's pretend I did a study about international students experience cultural shock. And I wrote in my article about that, this text here, that 60% of international students experience some degree of cultural shock. The most common symptoms are extreme sadness, depression, extreme homesickness, helplessness, isolation, irritability, anger and hostility, sleep and eating disturbances, and critical reactions to host culture. By the way, this is actually what the research tells about cultural shock. So let's say this is the article you read, right? And you're asked to paraphrase it. So then you write this. According to Guerson, cultural shock is present in 60% of international students. Symptoms include extreme sadness, depression, homesickness, helplessness, isolation, irritability, anger and hostility, sleep and eating disturbances, and critical reactions to host culture. Sorry, I cut off a little bit early there. What do you feel about this paraphrase? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Yay, no? Is it okay? You can say something in the chat. Not enough? Okay. There's too much copying. The list of symptoms here is the same, right? Okay, maybe it's all right because you acknowledge where you got the source. You said according to Guerson. So you're saying, I am saying this is what this person said, right? So I'm not stealing their words. Okay. But it's too similar. Yeah. So what's the better? You could quote, maybe you could put quotation marks, according to Guerson, and quote, 60% of international students, blah, 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 blah. But here's a better way of going about it. And you'll notice that here's the original text, okay? Sometimes when you paraphrase, you actually have to add more to your text because you have to explain a bit what that source was that you just used. So here's what I mean by that. So I'm going to use this text, and then I will say in my article, in my essay, in order to understand the challenges facing international students at the University of Toronto, Alexandra Guerson, coordinator of a foundation program for first-year students, interviewed over 100 students from 2 different cohorts. So this would have been information that would have been in other parts of the article. Somewhere else, there might be explanation of who the author is, but if there wasn't, you would look it up, okay? So before you even deal with what the information is that you're citing, you need to give a little explanation of what that information is, who is the person that is giving that information, right? So you're explaining a bit about what that was. Now, Guerson noticed that cultural shock play a significant impact on students' ability to adapt and do well in first year. so I don't actually even go through all of the symptoms. I can just say, as she explains, cultural shock has many symptoms. I can just say there's many symptoms, but I would like to focus on the sense of isolation and hostility. Okay, so this original study lists all kinds of symptoms from cultural shock, but that's too many, right? You won't have time to talk about all of them in your essay. So then your job is to find a focus. And then here it says, okay, I like to focus on this. I could have cited them as well. She explains these symptoms, and I could quote all the symptoms, but I'm going to focus on only these two. So you see what I mean? I'm not using the same words. I'm only using the ideas that come from that text and explaining it more. So this is where I tell my students, when they think they don't have enough sources to talk to use for their essays. It's like, you do, because you have to explain them, explaining all this first long sentence at the beginning, just explaining who the author is, what the study was, all of that, that takes room. Right? So don't be afraid, but try to not be too close to what the original texts are. I think that would be my main tip. So if you can take notes about describing what the things you're reading, that will help you in the long run. And don't be afraid if you're unsure. Maybe I read this study and I don't understand it exactly. There's too many information there that I don't understand. This is where it would be appropriate for you to go to your teaching assistant, to go to your professor with your text, showing that you read it. So I read this. I'm not sure where to go with it. I'm not sure how do I focus it. Can you give me some suggestions? And then your prof can say, okay, what is one thing you're really interested in, or can ask you questions about it and help you narrow it down. I do that all the time with my students. They come to me without knowing how to focus, and I can help them, guide them to a focus. That is perfectly valid use of a office hour, for example. So this is one issue in terms of expectation that I wanted to highlight. In the end of the day, this transition to university will be about how you cope, and to show your resiliency. So coping and resiliency, they might not be familiar words to you, but what they mean is how you react. So my friend, for example, with that C+, with that F in an essay, she could have just decided, okay, I'm no good at this. I'm not good in history. I'm not good in English. I should just switch majors. I should, not do what I really like. But she didn't do that because she really did like history. So she tried to learn from, okay, so what happened there? What was the miscommunication? How can I fix it? How can I not do this again? And even though her experience in first year was not good, and mine was, we still ended up in the same place. We still ended up both in the same graduate program for our PhD. We still ended up both getting a PhD. We still both ended up becoming a professor. So that first year experience is not going to determine what happens to you for the rest of your life. Okay, so when you have a setback, don't just think that, okay, this means I'm no good at math, or this means I'm no good at statistics. That might not be what that means. A lot of the first year courses can not be very representative of what that field is actually like. So talk to other students in your field. Talk to other people that are taking those first year classes with you. they might help understand, get a sense of that perspective. But in the end of the day, be kind to yourself. Okay, it goes back to that seeking help part. If you're tired all the time, if you're feeling exhausted, if you're not sleeping, this is a moment where you can seek help. If you're in Toronto and you feel homesick, this is a moment where you can seek help. If you're feeling isolated, that's a moment where you can seek help. And there's many ways you can seek help. This is just like one stop, but if you are, in first year and it's something to do with academic, maybe you got sick and that prevents you from going to class or doing your work. Maybe you email your professor, you haven't heard back. You can always contact your registrar's office. They can help you, especially because usually if someone is sick, it means not just one class is affected, but maybe all of your classes are affected, right? So the registrar can help navigate through all of those courses for you. If it's a social issue or a different kinds of health issues, the Office of Student Life can help you with those things too, or can get you to the people that can help you. If you're in IFP, the International Programs Office will be your one stop for any issue you might be having, and this applies to all of you too. Don't think of only in academics, think in all of the other aspects of that. Now let me just go back here for a minute, because I had a good question before. Okay, Kanishk asked that we've seen a common rule on Sydney Smith Commons. If you don't know what Sydney Smith Commons is, it might be an interesting thing to look that up. So Sydney Smith Commons, where we as students should look at 2 to 3 hours of study time outside class for every hour of lecture. Do you recommend this as a rule of thumb? I think it will vary a lot. It will vary by the class, by the kind of work you need to do. And you might find that that time will be different in first year than it will be later on. In first year, in general, you may have some reading assigned for your class that you're supposed to do before class. And that can easily take you an hour. That can take you more than that. Depends on how your reading ability is, right? And by reading ability, it doesn't necessarily mean just the language abilities, because you can be in first year in your own language and still find it difficult to read the kinds of academic texts that we assign. I remember in my first degrees in Brazil, in my own native language, I would read texts and I understood all of the words, but I had no idea what that text was saying. So that's a common experience. So especially in certain fields, like if you're in the science, academic science articles have a very specific format and language. So even if you are a native language speaker, you have trouble with it. But then your professor is going to teach you ways of getting through that text faster. So that can take you longer. So maybe, the studying outside of class for that first year class is like, there's, 20, 30 pages that you need to read before class. And then you have to review your notes after. And you may think, oh, that's not that much work. But it depends on how long it takes you to do that work, right? For some, it may take half an hour. So some it take 3 hours. There are strategies for going through reading a little bit faster. This is where writing centers can also help you, because they can teach you reading strategies as well as writing strategies. what I would say in terms of those recommendations that you could use as a rule of thumb is try to regularly, that means, every week, do some reviewing of what you went through that week. Because you will be in class, maybe you'll be listening to videos of recordings of lectures. Take notes. And taking notes, it'll be a little awkward at first, but take notes. Don't try to, you maybe want to write down every word that, especially if you're listening to a recording video, write a transcript of the whole lecture. Don't do that. Try to take, an abbreviated set of notes for you to be able to go through a little quicker when you're reviewing. Because what you want to do is make sure you have a body of notes that you understand later. And this is why you need reviewing later in the week, because on the day off that you listen to a lecture, it's still in your memory. So you can look at your notes, and even if your notes are not great, it still makes sense to you because you're relying on your memory. But if you wait a few days, if you wait a week and look back at those notes, that memory fades, right? And then you have to rely on what you actually wrote down. And that it may make less sense. So that's the one thing I did. I would take notes in class. Sometimes I recopy some of my notes to improve them a little bit. I mean, do that if you have time. I don't necessarily think that was the best use of my time. I just did it. But it's important to go through the material again later and try to watch the things you need to watch on a weekly basis. Don't let it accumulate. I can see if you have to watch recordings that it's easy to miss one and then you miss a second one and then there's like 3-4 hours of lectures you haven't watched. Flashcards can, I got a question about whether taking notes on flashcards would work. It depends on the kind of information, right? So if you're in a course where there will be some kind of testing of content, or there's content you actually need to know because you're going to need to understand these concepts for future courses, then flashcards can work, right? Where you can write the name of a concept on one side, a definition on the other side, so that you can keep that fresh in your mind. And you can do it physically with an actual card, or you can do it online with tools. There's all kinds of tools that create flashcards for you, or you can design flashcards. So this is the thing about learning and academic strategies at university. If you meet a learning strategist, that you see that they won't tell you that there is one way to do something. This is how you should read, this is how you should study. They'll work with you to find out which way works for you, because there's a million ways in which we can study, we can take notes, we can do things. The important thing is finding what works for you, right? Because we all learn slightly different ways. You're doing the right thing already by attending these sessions. I think it will make you a little bit more prepared. The one thing I would say, be patient this year. I think all of us are going to be struggling a little bit. Your professors are also going to be struggling a little bit, because you can think about someone has been teaching for a long time and now they're taught to be teaching in a completely different way. They've been preparing all summer, but I am sure there will be, some are going to be much more comfortable in teaching online than others. So use that opportunity, talk to your professor, kindly suggest if something is not going well, if they're speaking too fast, if they're speaking too slow, if the lectures are too long, chat with them about it. I think we all need to stick together this year to get over this interesting times.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I really have nothing to add. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming.
Yes, It's
Yeah,
late evening for you, early morning here. So for
mm-hmm,
those who woke up early, good for you.
mm-hmm.
And for those who stayed, maybe you had something more fun to do at 8 p.m.
Yeah.
But good for you for showing up.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you again for coming. I'm going to end the meeting now, and it was lovely seeing you all again, and I'll see you again tomorrow.
See you.
Bye, everyone.